Studio Microphone 8 Terrifying Janitor Horror Stories. True scary stories you should never watch alone. Introduction. They work when the world sleeps. They move silently through empty halls, abandoned classrooms, and dark office buildings. Janitors, keepers of the night, often find themselves alone in the strangest places. And in the shadows, where no one else is watching, the darkness sometimes watches back. Tonight, I'll share with you 8 terrifying true janitor horror stories. These are not tales of imagination, but chilling encounters told by custodians who swear what they saw and felt still haunts them to this day. So turn off the lights, lock your doors, and listen carefully, because sometimes, what hides in the dark isn't dust or cobwebs, it's something far more sinister. Story 1. The School Basement. There's a reason most kids fear the basement of their school. For Mr. Hall, a janitor at a rural high school, the fear became all too real. Every night, he made rounds in the basement, an area lined with old lockers, broken desks, and a boiler room that hissed and groaned. But one evening, as he turned the corner, he heard the faint sound of knuckles rapping against a locker door. Thinking it was vandals hiding, he shouted, yet no answer came. The knocking grew louder, faster, desperate. When he approached, he swore he heard a muffled child's voice whispering from inside. "Please let me out." He opened the locker. It was empty. The noise didn't stop though. Every locker down the hallway began banging in unison, as if hundreds of unseen fists pounded from inside. Mr. Hall never worked the night shift again. Story 2. The Empty Hospital Wing. A janitor named Luis worked at an old hospital in Texas. Part of his shift included mopping the floors of a wing that had been closed for years. Everyone warned him about that wing. Patients had died there under strange circumstances, and nurses refused to step inside. One night, while sweeping, he heard the sound of squeaky wheels echoing down the hall. Like a gurney being pushed. He froze. The wing had no power. No lights. No patients. Still, the sound grew closer, until it stopped right behind him. When he turned around, there was nothing. But wet footprints, bare, human footprints, trailed across his freshly polished floor, and led straight into one of the locked rooms. The next day, when the locks were checked, there was no sign the door had ever been opened. Story 3. The Shadow in the Auditorium. Cleaning theaters is never fun. The seats stretch back into pitch darkness, and you always feel like someone is watching. For a university janitor named Diane, this fear became very real. She often worked alone, sweeping the aisles of the old campus auditorium. One night, she saw movement, a figure sitting in the back row. She assumed it was a student who had stayed behind. But when she walked toward them, the figure stood up, taller than any human she had ever seen. It didn't move down the aisle, it simply glided between the rows, always keeping its distance, always in the shadows. The lights flickered, and when they returned, every single seat was empty. Except for one. The seat in the back row was still creaking, as if someone had just stood up. Story 4. The Abandoned Mall. A janitor named Carl worked night shifts in a shopping mall that had been partially abandoned. Half the shops were empty, the food court closed, and only a few stores kept business alive. Carl hated the mannequins. At night, they seemed to move. Sometimes, he swore their heads were turned in directions he hadn't left them. But the worst night came when he was buffing the floor outside a darkened clothing store. From the corner of his eye, he saw a mannequin step forward. At first, he laughed it off, thinking he imagined it. Until another mannequin took a step. Then another. Soon, 5 of them stood in the store's entrance, all facing him, their faceless heads tilted. Carl dropped his keys and ran. When security checked the store, every mannequin was back in place. But the footage showed something disturbing. Carl running, and behind him, shadows moving across the glass storefront, keeping pace. Story 5. The Haunted College Dorm. Janitor Rebecca worked in a college dormitory with a reputation for tragedy. Years earlier, a student had taken his life in room 237. Rebecca avoided that hallway at night, but duty forced her one shift to mop near the cursed room. She noticed the door was cracked open. Inside, the lights flickered, and the faint sound of weeping filled the air. Rebecca, trembling, peeked in. The room was completely empty. But written on the fogged-up window were words that hadn't been there before. Still here. The next morning, the room was found locked from the inside. Story 6. Voices in the Museum. Museums are eerie at night. The silence, the stillness, it feels like the past is watching you. A janitor named Thomas worked at a history museum. One night, while dusting the glass cases, he heard whispers. At first, they sounded like visitors, until he realized the voices were coming from inside the exhibits. The Egyptian display, in particular, grew louder, chanting, angry voices that made his skin crawl. As he ran toward the exit, every single artifact case slammed shut at once. The alarms blared, but when guards arrived, not a single case showed damage. Yet Thomas never returned. He swears he still hears those whispers at night, calling his name. Story 7. The Factory Restroom. Factories are unsettling after hours. Giant machines looming in silence, shadows stretching across concrete. David, a janitor at an old textile mill, hated cleaning the restrooms. Not because of the mess, but because of the mirror. Every time he looked in, he noticed something strange. His reflection lingered. It didn't blink when he blinked. Didn't move when he moved. One night, his reflection smiled. But he didn't. The mirror shattered, and though shards of glass covered the floor, his reflection was still staring back at him, smiling from every broken piece. Story 8. The Last Shift. A janitor named Henry was just weeks from retirement. He worked at an elementary school for 40 years and thought he'd seen it all. But on his final week, strange things began happening. Children's laughter echoed down empty hallways. Classroom doors slammed shut when no one was near. On his last night, Henry walked the halls one final time. In the reflection of a classroom window, he saw dozens of children standing behind him. But when he turned, no one was there. Still, tiny handprints began appearing on the glass, one after another, until the whole window was covered. Henry left his keys on the desk and walked out, never looking back. The next morning, the principal found the words written across the chalkboard in white dust. Don't leave us. Outro. These are the 8 terrifying janitor horror stories, real accounts from people who worked alone in the dark and saw things they'll never forget. The next time you see a janitor sweeping a hallway at night, remember, they may not be alone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales. And remember, never watch these stories alone.